is an apostle set first in the church.
Yeah.
First. I'd say that represents a great amount of divine favor, don't you? And yet, here's something that Jesus had to say to Peter. And this would happen during the same time Jesus had been given all power in heaven and on earth. Simultaneously. Same time. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, it's a different matter now, Peter. Thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whithersoever thou wouldest not. And brethren, that may be your lot too. In fact, you know what? In a small way, that's true of all suffering. None of us just enjoy suffering for suffering's sake, do we? I mean, are any of us crazy like that? I just really like for my heart to be melted like wax within me. I just enjoy that. No, suffering's like going somewhere you really don't want to go. Chastening is certainly no enjoyment for the time. It's what it yields that makes it endurable, isn't it?
Yes.
It's what it yields that makes it endurable. And nonetheless, here is a child of God, highly favored of God, and yet in the hands of men at God's will. Love, divine love and suffering are in the same context in salvation. You cannot have one without the other. They're both together. I'm sure that's clearly seen by you, brethren, but it is a commentary on the sadness of our day and the departure of truth, how it has fallen in the streets, that we should have to affirm this as if this is some strange new teaching. No, it's not. This is how it's always been. Ask the prophets. You can go back to Abel. Start with one of the first men around. He can tell you what it's like to offer a sacrifice unto God and get in trouble for doing it. He can tell you what it's like. He always says here, we are killed all day long. We are killed. He doesn't say, I'm killed all day long. We are killed. We. And I appreciate that. You see, this isn't just about Paul. This is about the people of God as a whole, and that's where you're getting in right now. We're talking about the people of God here, you see. Psalm 44, 11 and 12. Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat, and hast scattered us among the heathen. Thou sellest thy people for naught. I thought those were the people he dearly loved and shed abroad the Spirit in their hearts by the Holy Ghost. Yeah, those are the people. My people. He gives them up as sheep for the slaughter. Okay? Here's another text. Romans chapter 8. Look at what leads up to Paul pulling this text out of the Psalms. It's a very we mentality. Romans 8:27. He that searcheth the hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints, according to the will of God. The saints. Not just for me. The saints. All of them. Collectively. All the saints. We know. Who knows? All the saints. We know, in our measure, I understand, from the least to the greatest, all of them in one degree know this. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God. To them that love God, that's a collective view. That's all the saints. There's no such thing as a saint that God doesn't love. All the saints. All the saints. Look down at verse 31. What shall we say to these things? Brethren, it's no honor to God for someone not to be responding when the truth's being proclaimed. We're all going to say something when we hear the truth. All of us. Because none of us are indifferent to the truth. We've got something to say. In fact, when the truth gets in your heart, it's really hard to close the mouth of a saint when you have the spirit of faith within. What shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? That's all the saints. He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all. That's all the saints. It's all the saints. How shall he not with him freely give us all things? Brother Gibbons said, maybe different measures, but it is the same in general content and nature. All the saints get the same. See? In that sense, it's us. It's us. Why? Because, brethren, you got no right to take suffering personal. Now, I speak as one that used to do this. Used to do this. Hey, get in trouble down in Jensen Beach, and the first thing I did is call Brother Given and load him with this care. Wasn't that nice of me to do that? Boy, look at how one of my Timothys is languishing under suffering. What's wrong with him? And he'd have to say something like that, you know, in a kind and loving way. But he'd have to do that, and you may have to do that yourself. Say something like that. Brother, these are footmen. What's wrong with you? We haven't even gotten to horsemen yet. Come on. Let's not gripe about our sufferings. Let's not complain about it. Let's not act as if it's strange.
Amen.
Didn't Jesus say you had your cross? It's not my cross, your cross. It's your cross. And it is to be borne. That's what crosses are for, brother, and they are to be borne. That makes suffering very personal, doesn't it? It is. You see, this is a collective view of suffering because that will help you bear it.
That's right.
When you realize that the saints throughout the world, like Peter said, are undergoing the same afflictions you are,
That's right.
it will help you to bear it. See, he's helping us to bear our suffering.
Amen.
You're not the only one facing suffering.
Amen.
And you don't have the right to think as if you were. Well, they don't know how much I've gone through. Well, you, quite honestly, don't understand the full extent of what Jesus has gone through. That silences all the arguments of any under-suffering, so to speak.
That's right.
Let's not complain about suffering when we know Jesus suffered infinitely more than we did to give us salvation in the first place. Let's not do that, brethren. We are killed all day long. And, brethren, another thing to see here is that this is the manner of the Father as he deals with his children. This is his manner, is to chasten. Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth.
Yes.
And scourgeth. That's a strong word. God would get in trouble with the governments of our day. He'd get in trouble in America. You get in trouble, don't you, for disciplining your children? How about if you scourge them? God scourges his children. He scourges them. Brother, that's an act of violence. It's a controlled scourging, but it's a scourging nonetheless. That's what he does. He goes on to say in that text, if you endure chastening, God deal with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? God doesn't have any children he doesn't chasten. They all get a whipping, so to speak. Okay, that's kind of a denigrating way of looking at it. Even us who are growing along and maturing, you face the chastening hand of the Lord. He does. He chastens every son whom he receives. So if you're being chastened and you're walking by faith, let it be a token and evidence to you that God has in fact received you. That sounds crazy to the world. But to the man that walks by faith, let that strengthen you in the time of suffering. God is dealing with you as with sons.
Amen.
And God doesn't only chasten his sons, does he? In fact, he chases them so they might be partakers of his holiness. That's our God for you. See? We are killed. For thy sake we are killed. Let's look at that for just a second. For thy sake. I have two perspectives on that. For thy sake we are killed. One is this, and this is in fact, no doubt, what the psalmist saw when he wrote this. God's enemies become our enemies by virtue of our association with God. They become our enemies. It's just because God has enemies. And when you're of God, they become your enemies. And this is mentioned over and over in the scriptures. I'll just give you a few of these. John chapter 7, verse 7, Jesus, the world cannot hate you, but me it hateth because I testify of it that the works thereof are evil. Where did he get that testimony? I only say the things the Father told me to say. God said, say it. Jesus got in trouble for it. For thy sake, we are killed all day long. That's what's going to happen.